I've been reading your book, This Timeless Moment, with extraordinary fascination. I don't think I've ever read a biography quite like that, because it's not a complete biography. It's the story of the last days, in a way, or the last years of Aldous Huxley. But I can't think of anybody else who has been written about by his widow, and a case where the book was so very largely concerned with the process of death and with a highly intelligent form of dying. There is, as I remember, a story which is supposed to have been told of Goethe, that when he was dying, somebody called, wanted to see him, but the maid answering the door said, "But the master is busy dying." And our culture is one in which death is invariably something swept under the carpet. Yes. We pretend it doesn't really happen. Yes. And therefore there is no realization that dying is an art.
And it's an adventure too, you know. It's maybe, I don't know, but maybe it's the only chance that we have, that one. We don't know.
It is, and I think as you tell the story, you acted as a marvelous high priestess in helping someone through this adventure.
Well, Aldous had done the same thing for his first wife, Maria, you see, and that, of course, gave me the inspiration. And he spoke very often of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I haven't read completely, but I mean, I know the basic assumption. And I mean, throughout his work, he spoke about this fact of paying attention. You remember in Ireland,
where the minor birds call out, "Here and now, boys, attention!"
You know, I love so much your seminar, your tapes, and that book. It's the best presentation of that book that I could hope to hear.
Yes, I think that was a very great book, Island. The problem is that I found in giving lectures, if I announce a title for a lecture and then give a lecture on a different subject, even though it may be a perfectly good lecture, people are somehow discombobulated.
I think you always give a lecture on a different subject, Alan. You always do that.
I can talk about the same thing in ever so many different ways. But the point is, when Aldous put out Island, he put it out in the form of a novel.
That's right.
And people have very fixed ideas of what a novel is supposed to be. And they had identified Aldous to a great extent as a novelist. And then when it so turned out that Island was a sociological textbook almost, a sociological blueprint in the form of a novel, they said, well, he's really sermonizing with a few entertaining bits added just because of the novel form.
Yes, I mean, it would have really, I think, been better if he would have written it straight as a manual for living and loving and dying, because then it wouldn't the public would not have expected a novel, which apparently as a novel it's not at its very best.
No, but that's ridiculous. It's quite obvious to anyone who reads it that it wasn't really intended to be a novel.
Well, it's quite obvious to you,
Yes.
Alan. No, it's different, you know. And I mean, in conclusion, very few people have read it. And there are so many sequences, there are so many methods which are so practical for here and now. It would be wonderful if we could apply only a few of them. We would all feel better. You know, I have really sort of a crusade against useless suffering. And in that book, there is so much about suffering which is not necessary, it's not creative, it's just nothing. It doesn't bring any enlightenment, any compassion.
A great number of young people are reading this book today.
Good, yes.
And it has become a sort of inspiration for many of them for experiments in forming new kinds of family, new communities, intentional communities. But I heard a story where Aldous was challenged about this book and said, now, did you mean this seriously? And he said, oh, no, it was purely an intellectual exercise.
Did he say that?
Well, he's supposed to have said that. But what do you think about that? You were with him while he was
Well,
writing.
I think exactly the contrary. I don't think it was an intellectual exercise. I mean, he might have said that as a joke,
Yes.
but he really, every sequence in that book, every method, every recipe, if you like to call it that way, is something that most of them, at least, he experimented himself in his own life. And don't know, it was not an intellectual exercise. The part of the novel, the writing the novel, it was probably an intellectual exercise because he had to fit it.
No, I realize that.
Yes, but...
Aldous also once said, when you're with savages, don't fool with them because you will end up in the cooking pot. And therefore he used to know how to be very perspicacious and tactful about his public relations. But you know, a thing that has often occurred to me is that Aldous Huxley was one of the most highly educated men I ever ran into. Mm. When you study the field of his interests, the scope of his interests, especially as revealed in his essays, he knew a great deal about the history of art, an enormous amount about the history of science and technology. He was fond of the theater. He knew about music. He had an encyclopedic mind, and he carried all this with a lovely urbanity, so much so that I think a great many people simply didn't know how to understand him because they weren't well educated enough.
That's right. The frame of reference was enormous. But for instance, I can tell you about music. I am a violinist. I've been trained as a violinist, has been the major work in my life. And one time he mentioned a concerto, a Viotti concerto, that no one knows except violinists who had to study it, to work the technique and so on. And he knew this Viotti concerto. It was absolutely extraordinary. He knew as much as specialists, really, in their field. And then, of course, he could correlate all of this. And in this utopia, in this island, he wanted to put everything in, all the chemical study, all the progress in pharmacology, and make it into a concrete mysticism.
Well, I think he, along with that, you see, had the difficulty of living in a country where that sort of highly cultured intellectuality is envied, and because it's envied, it's put down. People used to circulate stories, for example, that before going to a party, Aldous would read in the Encyclopedia Britannica everything that it had to say on the letter P, the origins of that. And then he would subtly move the conversation around to where the letter P in some way became important, and then would proceed to be completely encyclopedic upon the subject.
Before going to a party, Aldous only discussed what I was going to wear and how he liked it and this and that.
Well, I think that sort of story expresses the envy and the resentment which people feel for such high culture. So I think we are seeing the re-emergence
more and more, yes,
in Western art of sheer glory.
Yes, absolutely.
Which we haven't seen since the stained glass and the illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages.
And it is the same thing. It's the mystical experience which brings this expression about.
I think that the best illustrations of paradise are to be found in Persian miniatures.
Ah, yes.
Was Aldous interested in those?
Yes, we had some books. Yes, he was always looking with the enlarging glass, to look at the details of the system.
Now, I must to some extent attribute the change in his attitude and also in Gerald Hurd's attitude to the time when they first encountered LSD. It seemed to me that in both of them, there was a marked shift of attitude. I suppose that those who would be unfavorable to all this would say, well, that's the time they got their brains damaged. But it was highly interesting damage for both of them, because I felt that the attitudes of both of them became somehow enriched.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, I knew Aldous very little before that. In fact, I only met him a few times. But when I saw him after that experience, which was in Rome, it was this tremendous vitality and this tremendous interest in looking and seeing and experimenting. Of course, he didn't do this experimenting so often as people thought, you know. It was done very, very rarely and very...
Oh, well, that's the way I think in any intelligent use of this kind of thing. Yes. A single experience gives you so much that it takes several months to digest it.
Yes, exactly.
And, you know, to go on week after week or worse, day after day with this sort of thing is to give yourself mystical indigestion.
Yes. Yes, and all this had not happened, you see, by the time that Aldous died. It was just beginning in 1963. I remember in the last few months or even weeks of his life, he began to hear about abuses, and so I think it would be horrifying to see what... I wonder what he would have done, you know, to prevent this. Of course, he would have done all that he could. And I wonder how much he could have accomplished in preventing this misuse and abuse. And the sensation, there is so much sensation about
all that kind of thing seems to me to be inevitable in a world where there are no secrets. Mm-hmm. In other words, scientific knowledge has to be public knowledge, because the community of scientists has to know all about it in order to work. And therefore, there are no secrets, and therefore everything gets broadcast around. And I felt that when Aldous had let the cat out of the bag with the doors of perception, and later with heaven and hell, that I ought to write something about it too. Mm-hmm. I was reserved about writing anything about it much before, but I felt that he had let the cat out of the bag, and that more needed to be said. Now, of course, the cat would have been let out of the bag eventually, there's no doubt about it. Well, anyway, I felt that this had fully opened his eyes to see that the mystical world, or the mystical dimension of unity behind the whole cosmos, was no longer something that required, for its vision, a turning away from the diversity of the material world. But you could see this unity, this underlying unity, right in the multiplicity of the material world. And he seemed to be feeling that more and more strongly as time went on.
Yes. I remember he was writing to me that summer before we were married, he was in New York, and he wrote to me that he went to see a musical comedy, and it was a very poor and vulgar thing. And he said, yet, even there, if one would look with attention and look deeply, one could find some kind of essence of beauty.
Well, I had exactly the same experience in listening to a terrible Baptist preacher on the radio.
Well, that's the same thing.
And it was really awful.
Yes.
And it was as phony as it could be.
Yes.
And it was concerned with money. Send in your dollar, you know, if you want to copy this address, be sure to send in your dollar. But as I listened deeply into that voice, it sounded like someone saying, well, I'm just alive and I got to eat too. And it was a little baby calling for its mother in the dark. But it was coming on like, you know, all this God and Jesus and salvation and everything, and saying it as if it knew all about it. But you could see this was a big front on quaking terror underneath. I like the story in which somebody was saying, I don't know how to tell you what sort of person she is, but she's the sort of person who would say serviette instead of napkin. Yes. And somebody said, some other lady present, well, I always say serviette instead of napkin. And then he said, well, you must know just the sort of person I mean. But in the final stages of his life, he was, wasn't he, about to begin another novel and had written some of it.
Yes, he wanted to write a sort of semi-autobiographical novel.
That's what I gathered, yes, from reading as much of it as you published.
And because he felt that there was so much intermingling, you know, intermingling his own life with the events of the century. It was so extraordinary what had happened since he was an adolescent or a child, that he thought it would be it would have been a very big work, you know, because That novel started in 1900, that first chapter that is in my book.
Yes.
And about himself as a child, I think that he was very much like that child that he describes there. I remember he speaks, also in his lecture, he spoke about Queen Victoria riding on a carriage about 2 or 3 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And now similar ladies of similar dignity and age go around the Corniche or in the highways here at 70 miles an hour. He used that to show how we can really develop our potentialities in so many different ways, in so many different directions. That was one of his constant thoughts, the development of human potentials.
Of course, his lifetime spans the most startling change of the speed of human history that has ever existed. And he simply, his lifetime bridges it.
Yes,
because he's
exactly.
got one foot in the Victorian era,
That's right.
and one in the 1960s.
That's right. That's what he wanted to do.
Yes. And I don't think any other people at any time have spanned such enormous change.
And he was so much with it all the time, all these changes in different fields.
Well, the critical period of change, you see, was just before the Second World War. You see, he published, just before the Second World War, because, you see, he published Ends and Means just before he left England, didn't he? That book comes about the same time as Eyeless in Gaza. And that was when he knew Gerald Hurd first. Now,
yes.
What prompted him to move to the United States?
Well, he was traveling, you remember. First of all, he lived in Italy a long time. And then in Italy, the fascist regime came about. And Gerald Hurd moved to America. And somehow this whole group of Englishmen moved here. And then he was here naturally for his eyesight. He found a teacher that helped him a great deal in overcoming this blindness. And they climb, and then they went to live in the desert. But I think that Gerald Hurd was did give the incentive to move here and leave Europe.
So it was primarily just his interest in Gerald Hurd and the group around.
It was a natural thing for him, I guess, or maybe a training thing, to take things as they came,
mm-hmm.
moment by moment, without sort of referring to old experiences. I think that he had probably more than anyone else this paradox, you see, where he had this terrific amount of information and memory. And then it was free, though, of emotional conditioning from the past.
How so?
Well, because the emotion of the past did not interfere with his present. In other words, with his present, he responded to the present with new reaction. I mean, he reacted to the present with fresh reaction and not with a conditioned reaction from the past.
Do you think he was in some respect helped by that, by the fire? After all, his past, all the records of his past practically were wiped out.
Yes, everything, yes. No, I don't think that the fire did that for him. I think more his meditation and his work with psychedelic and his constant vigilance in that sense. He was really very, very aware that should be stopped, you know, that one should stop this reacting to the present in terms of the past.
Yes.
That was very much in his consciousness all the time.
Well, of course, that's central to Krishnamurti's whole presentation, yes. But that fire, I had a friend who underwent the same sort of experience, where she had luckily built herself a new, smaller house, and just after she had moved into it, she'd kept a lot of records in the old house, and it was burned down. And there were all these souvenirs and letters and photographs and paintings and books, which are suddenly wiped out. And they're ordinarily things you cling on to and you feel you really can't do without that. And then suddenly it all goes.
Oh, yes, we had really several tons of these things. And so we went.
But he did rescue, didn't he, the manuscript of Ireland?
Yes, he rescued Ireland and 3 best suits, the suits that we had made in Italy.
And 3 suits?
Yes.
Ah.
He said, don't you think we should take some suits? I was in a completely useless state because the fire had so fascinated me that I was just looking at the fire all the time, and I would not even have thought of that. And all of a sudden he said, oh, I must take Ireland. So he went upstairs and took Ireland. And then he said, shouldn't we take some suits? So I said, yes, let's take some
But did he sort of risk his life doing this?
No, because our house was not in fire yet, but all around.
Oh, I see. The fire was approaching at the time.
Yes, it was approach. Oh, yes, I saw it approach. I saw it approach from the garden. In fact, the walls were illuminated so beautifully. You have no idea. It was just the right illumination. And I was looking so much that I would not even take in the suit, you see.
Well, that's certainly not reacting to the present in terms of the past.
No, that's right. It was past. I was just not reacting at all. It was just so beautiful, you know.
Yes, it's so fascinating how in moments of crisis we do tend to become much saner than we are normally.
Well, maybe that was sane. I don't know.
I mean, people accomplish the most. We can become geniuses in crisis.
Yes, but I didn't accomplish anything, you see. I just looked.
Well, I know, but you were contemplative instead of an active.
Yes, exactly the contrary of my nature. Absolutely the contrary. I'm very active. And there it was, this fire all around. But who said that the fire... I remember Aldo saying in his lecture on visionary experience that, is it Plotinus, that says the fire is the most beautiful thing in the world.
Yes.
In connection with precious jewel, you know, which contains the fire.
Christians still worship fire because for many people the most important time in a church service is watching the final extinction of the candles after the service is over, and they'll all wait on their knees until that's been done.
Yes, it's like seeing the sun going down at that moment.
Watching the sunset. Yes. Are there any materials of Aldous left over which will yet see the light of publication?
Well, the letters. Oh, that is going to be a marvelous volume, yes. It's coming out next year. It's coming out next year, and there are letters since the age of 14 to the last days, you see. And there are really, it's a marvelous biography. There you see all the passage in this man's life.
So he wrote a great deal of letters. Was this true all through his life? Was it true after you got married?
Oh, yes. He answered mail once a week, and he wrote an enormous amount of letters.
He's doing his writing letters, and I always use the telephone.